All right, let's see what you guys want to see today. Oh, so you want to get a little extreme, huh? Okay, let's get extreme. What's up, everybody? It's Nick here from the Lost River Drive-In, and today, by popular demand, I'm going to give you some of the most extreme movies in my collection. Now, I just want to say right off the top that extreme is a spectrum, and it's really just based off of what you deem as extreme. Is it super gory? Is the subject matter really dark and messed up? That is really up to you. These are just 10 movies in my collection that, for different reasons, I find very extreme. Now, you're not going to find some of the obscure off-the-wall stuff in this video. There's a few that some of you maybe haven't seen, but you're going to be familiar with a lot of these movies. Now, if you guys want to see more of this as it goes on, I will educate myself on some of those more obscure movies, and I will add them to the list. But without further ado, let's get started. Now, starting off, this is kind of a cheat, but whatever. Hostel and Hostel Part 2. Either one. They're both really messed up. Now, what makes these movies so disturbing is, yes, the gore is really over the top and at times very realistic, but it's the fact that it is all about torture. See, the people that are killed in this movie, it is done in a really elongated, violent, and painful way. I will never think of eyeballs the same way again, or blowtorches. I'll never think of certain breeds of dog the same way again. There's just a lot about both of these movies that is super uncomfortable. Yes, the gore is something that's really going to make you squeamish at times, and they do a really good job with it. But again, it's just the means of torture and the pain that these people are put through. Achilles tendon slicing, I mean, you name it. Hostel and Hostel Part 2 really were two of the films that really encapsulated the torture porn era in the early to mid 2000s. Now, I prefer Hostel Part 2 because it's just darker and it's a little more up my alley, but that's not to say that both of these films in their own right are not extreme and disturbing, because they are. Next up is going to be City of the Living Dead. Now, if you're a fan of the You Need a Horror podcast, you heard Christian and I talk at length about these Italian horror films in the last two episodes, City of the Living Dead being prominently featured. City of the Living Dead is extreme and disturbing in multiple different ways. Of course, with any Italian horror film, you're going to get this really over-the-top gore. And as Christian put it, and I agreed, it doesn't look like the Americanized gore. You know, there's a different color to it. These prosthetics just look a little rougher, and I mean that in a good way. That's a compliment. So, of course, there's things like that in this movie, where you're just like, oh, that's disgusting, whether it's vomiting up intestines or whether it's a maggot storm, whatever it may be. But there's also really disturbing stuff in this movie. There's a scene where a woman is buried alive, and that entire sequence is really suspenseful and tense, and the means she uses to try to get out of that casket are also just gross, and they really get under your skin. No pun intended. I keep looking at my hands, and if you've seen the movie, you know why. This movie, like a lot of these Italian horror films from that time, at least the ones I've seen, really got under your skin in a lot of different ways. And City of the Living Dead is no exception to that. This movie is absolutely extreme. And in keeping with theme, we'll go right to The New York Ripper, which is another Italian horror film directed by Lucio Fulci. Now, this movie on its face looks a lot more like it'd be up your alley if you're a big fan of 80s slasher movies. And I thought the same thing. But it kind of plays a trick on you. One, I will say, to the point of this movie being extreme, the gore is definitely cringeworthy at times. And I mean that as a compliment. It really is effective. These kills are mean. That's one thing I've noticed about these Italian horror films, is that the kills always seem to be mean. There's like, it's personal almost. And that is kind of disturbing. But also, it's just really disturbing and extreme because it takes what you think you're getting, this 80s slasher film, you know, I'm going to shut my brain off, eat some popcorn, and enjoy myself, and it flips that on its head. It's a mean slasher film. It's not a love letter to slasher films at all. If anything, it's the kind of movie that makes you want to go back and watch one of those because you're like, that made me feel dirty. I don't like that. Now, not to say you don't like it like you don't like the movie, but it is not at all what you'd be expecting. So if you're thinking about getting into Italian horror films, but you don't really want to branch too out into the obscure, try The New York Ripper, because it does have flares for that slasher subgenre, but it really is different, and I think it'll open your eyes and really make you decide pretty quickly whether you want to venture further into these kinds of movies. Now, few people did the unsettling and the disturbing as well as Eli Roth, so it's only natural that I'll talk about The Green Inferno. Look, I've only watched the movie a couple times because it is really disturbing. You know, a group of college kids go out to essentially protest deforestation, and there happens to be an indigenous tribe there that they don't really know what modern society is and modern life is. They know one way of living, and that is surviving. And they come across their path and, okay, we're going to eat you so we can survive. We don't understand your modern ways of communication or what is moral. And that's a real fear because there are groups of people out there in this world that are still like that. And it's not even personal. It's just like, hey, you came on our land, like we're going to eat you. So like, you know, sleep in fear tonight. But the movie is so disturbing because of what happens when they get there. I have always said that gore is not really a problem to me. But when the gore becomes super realistic, like it looks like it's actually happening, that's when it gets under my skin. There is a scene that involves the removing of like eyeballs and a tongue and stuff it's just brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And then the just inhumane nature and inhumane way these people are treated, and they're in this cage and this girl has to use the restroom in the corner of the cage. It's just really, really disturbing. Like all of it is gross. The whole movie has this just gross air about it to where you're just like, ugh, like no. And the gore is super, super realistic. And I feel like that ups the ante in the terms of extreme and disturbing. Look, The Green Inferno is not for everybody. And even if you like the movie like I do, it's not a movie that you're going to watch once a year and be like, God, it's such a great film. No, because it's unsettling, but that's why it's on this list. Next one is one that recently took the world by storm, and that's Terrifier 2. Now you could go with either one because they're both incredibly extreme, and I have no reason to believe that Terrifier 3 will be anything less than just as extreme. Now, a lot of people will say, well, the gore in Terrifier 2 isn't super realistic. You know, it's so over the top that it's campy, it's cartoony. That's absolutely right. The gore in this movie doesn't gross me out. It's not something that really gets under my skin because it doesn't look super realistic. But the reason why Terrifier 2 is so extreme is because the depravity of the kills, the depravity of the character of Art the Clown. Everything about these kills, the setup and the execution of them, whether it looks super realistic or not, it drags on. The complete disrespect for human beings and human life is so prevalent throughout these movies in every kill. And to a lot of people that make you go, I have no interest in watching those movies. To me, I find that kind of funny because it is presented in a way that is cartoony and over the top, but it's really messed up. There is an elongated kill in this movie that involves bleach and salt and flaying and, I mean, you name it. It is so depraved that you can only walk away from this movie and that scene specifically going like, dude, who would write that? Never mind the mashed potatoes, okay? Look, Terrifier and Terrifier 2 are extreme movies. They're depraved, they're disgusting, and I love you. Next up is going to be the remake of Maniac. And I'm just going to say right off the top, this is one of the best remakes I've ever seen. I actually prefer this to the original film. Elijah Wood is incredible in this movie. The whole POV from the killer's perspective the entire time is a really interesting tact. And the fact that Elijah Wood actually did it, even though he didn't have to be there because it was mainly just hands, he did it. He did the whole thing. That is true dedication. Look, this movie is nasty. There are kills in this movie, even from the beginning. Like this scalping that you get, that is just gross. A lot of practical effects throughout this film. But I think the thing that makes this movie so extreme is, yes, the gore is realistic at times and over the top, but it's just the absolute lack of true empathy that you have with your character. He is so insane. He doesn't even realize how insane he is. He can justify everything in his mind. There's a reason. It's all rooted in this deep-seated trauma that he has, that he's carried throughout his entire life. But he doesn't realize that he is like a monster walking amongst us, truly depraved. Look, I love this film. I think this movie is incredible. And Frank Calhoun being a French filmmaker, I just really like that style. The aesthetic of this movie is really, really enjoyable. There's a lot of unique things they do with the camera and the framing of some shots that'll really just bring you in. Look, it's a great movie, but it's definitely extreme. Now, I'm going to throw this one on the list, and some people might go, I don't really find that extreme, but it's time that we give it its due, because it is extreme. And that's Hellraiser. Look, in 1987, when this movie came out, you didn't really see horror movies in America like this. Like, the absolute depravity of this film. We have demons from another dimension that get off on causing pain. That is their pleasure. They come to torture you, to skin you, to fill you with hooks and rip you apart. There is so much about this movie that shouldn't be normalized, and I mean that in a loving way. Because when you put this up against Halloween or Friday the 13th or A Nightmare on Elm Street, you go down the list, those movies are tame in comparison to this one. This movie is like a sadomasochist's wet dream. This movie is way over the top in so many ways. I mean, there are moments in this film that are just truly grotesque, but so impressive. You know, I'm thinking about when Frank comes back to life. That is gross. Like, that's disgusting. And then just the look of Frank. Like, skinless muscles and tendons. It's so nasty. There's a lot about this movie that I feel like people just kind of sweep under the rug because they're like, oh, you know, 80s horror film, like whatever. No, watch this movie again. It is extreme, and I'm not going to let anyone say it's not. Now, it warms my heart to be able to put this one on the list, and that's Evil Dead 2013. Now, why is this movie on the list? This was a big hit. You know, this wasn't some underground film. Like, how can it be that extreme? Just because it wasn't an underground film does not mean it's not extreme. There's so much about this movie that is extreme. The, obviously, body horror that you get from, I don't know, whether it's cutting off an arm or splitting a tongue with an X-Acto knife, that's just gross. Then you have the Deadites, and specifically Mia. The stuff she says, the way she looks, the way she acts, it's just really disturbing. This movie scared a lot of people when it came out a decade ago, and for good reason, because there's gore in this movie that is unsettling, that is just painful to look at. And there's also just moments where you don't want to look at the screen because you don't know what these creepy half-dead demons are going to say. There's so much about this movie, and it's Fede Alvarez that just really, really brought this to the film. It's just unsettling. And I, personally, although it's a movie that a lot of people have seen and, you know, they really enjoy, I personally don't want to diminish the fact that this movie is extreme, and it's going to be on my list. Now, next up is a movie that I love. I do love the film, but it's not one I can watch a lot, and that is The Last House on the Left, the remake. Look, this movie isn't disturbing in the sense of gore. At the top, I talked about sometimes movies are disturbing not necessarily because of the gore, but because of the subject matter. That is what this movie is. Look, the second half of the movie is a delight. It is a treat. You get to watch horrible things happen to horrible people that deserve it. And that is the reason that you're watching the film. But in the first act of the movie, what happens and what spurs this story is truly hard to watch. Very, very uncomfortable. It's elongated. It's just, I'm not going to use the word or go into detail. If you guys know this movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That is never easy to watch on film. Especially this movie. But the movie does that so you really hate these people and you really want to see terrible things happen to them. So while it is a tough watch and not one you're going to find popping in your Blu-ray player every couple weeks, it's a great movie, and it's also really extreme. And the last one for today, let's bring the vibes up a little more positivity. That is going to be Black Christmas from 2006. And yes, I'm still hunting for the Blu-ray that is out of print. If any of you find a Black Christmas 2006 Blu-ray, please, for the love of God, send it to me. I will pay for it. But anyway, this movie is 100% extreme. And it really has to do with the gore. It's not so much the subject matter. Although there is some subject matter like incest and stuff that's really messed up. There are moments in this movie that are just fun, you know, mid-2000s schlock. There's also moments in this movie where the gore and what is happening is really uncomfortable. Look no further than cooking flesh cookies and eating them. It's just gross. Look, Black Christmas 2006 is a much more easier watch than some of these movies I talked about because the gore a lot of times is fun. It's jolly, you know, right in the spirit of Christmas. But there are moments in this movie that are depraved. And it really makes you wonder, Jesus, who wrote this movie? There you have it, guys. There are 10 of the most extreme movies in my collection. I have more, and I will do more of these if you want to see them, but I want to know down below what you guys think of every movie I talked about. Do you find any of them disturbing? Do you not? Please leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I thank you so much for stopping at the Lost River Drive-In. This is Nick, and I'm pulling out.